I was going to shut down my family bookstore, but the Indian rhinoceros saved it.
That's a rare bird.
In my travels through Kaziranga, I saw the jungle growing again, and I heard the story of the rhino.
50 years ago, there were only 400 rhinos. But now, there are more than 2,400.
India showed me what can happen if you don't give up. And if the Indian rhino can make a comeback in this day and age, so can my bookstore.
Incredible India.
So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning to my colleagues in the United States, and good afternoon to those in Europe. We welcome you to the 6th day of lecture series based on the books on princely states or Indian states of Gujarat. My name is Dr. Maitri Vaidya Sabnis. I am an associate professor at Department of History, the Maharaja Sayajirao University of Vadodara, and I'm also one of the chief editors, along with Dr. Kenneth Robbins, who is also the first speaker of these 2 lectures that will be listening in this evening. The 3 volumes are a compilation of articles which address the ways in which history can be revised. The articles illustrate how the past, if revised, leads to a different historical discourse. We can say the volumes reflect a certain sense of multiculturality and multidisciplinarity, which I can say is the need of the hour, and takes the reader on a path untraversed before. As a student of history, I am trained to give a sacrosanct treatment to the primary sources. Most of these sources are carefully collected, catalogued, and preserved. However, such sources have their own limitation. They only tell a one-sided story. Today, we are in for a treat as the theme of the day is Rajputs. And the Rajputs, in fact, I think Ken will tell you that they had existed in Gujarat since the 8th century. Since then, the geopolitical characteristics of many states of Gujarat has been shaped by fluid and changing dynamics of Rajput clans. Today, our first speaker, Dr. Kenneth X. Robbins, is going to talk on Rajput clans of Gujarat. So he doesn't need any introduction. May I request him to please deliver his lecture?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maitri. So these are the 3 volumes that we have produced for you, talking not only about the rulers and administrative and economic history, but how these states were created and absorbed into other entities, but also on patronage and paintings and prestige. When we talk about the Rajputs, we're talking about a number of clans. They have all different sorts of ancestry. The 3 types of clans that we're concerned about are distinct lines that are solar lines, lunar lines, and fireborn lines. And within each of those categories, which are some of the 36 royal races or clans, we see rulers in Gujarat. Over the years, a couple of things have emerged. First of all, the ruler of the state must be from that clan. We'll see this play out in the case of a state in Rajasthan, where a Jhala master of the palace really had the power. And in the 19th century, that state, Kota, was carved up into Kota and a new state called Jalavar. The second thing is that the Rajputs were not limited to Rajputana, as many people think. In fact, their origins in many cases were not Rajputana. Even that most Rajasthani dynasty in Mewar originated in Gujarat. And if you look at any of the clans, you'll see that they had states that they ruled in across northern India. And lastly, the ruler had to be of that clan, but the wives of the ruler had to be from another clan. So there was a tremendous Pan-Indic flow between different states, between Jhalas, for example, and Jodhpur. Our speaker today, the present Maharaja of Dhrangadhra, his mother came from Jodhpur, and a Dhrangadhra princess was sent to Jodhpur at the same time. The clans that are most popular or most powerful in Gujarat changed over time. Today, it's the Jhalas and the Jadijas, the most prominent clans, especially during the period of British paramountcy. In other times, other clans, like the Solankis, were much more powerful. In fact, we can even consider the 12th century Solanki ruler as the founder of the notion of Gujarat. Now, today, the Solankis rule only in a few small states. You can see this on the right-hand side. You see the population of these states, biggest of which is Lunavada, with a population of 5,000. And then you get states as small as Thamba with a population of less than 5,000. As I said, there are solar clans, lunar clans, and fireborn clans. What do we mean by a fireborn clan? If you look at this image from Bundi and the coat of arms of Bari Estate, you'll see a figure emerging from a sacred fire. This was a sacrificial fire ceremony at Mount Abu to rid the world of evil. And out of this sacred pit sprang 4 warriors. The most powerful one is the progenitor of the Chauhans. And he was formed 4-armed in the image of the god Vishnu, and was therefore styled the 4-armed. The Chauhans invoked their ancestors' connection to another mountain besides Mount Abu, Pavagadh, whose importance is seen in the studies of the sage Visvamitra. Visvamitra is supposed to have created a river, transported Pavagadh mountain from the Himalayas, and established Baroda at the side of a banyan tree he blessed. The lake that is mentioned near the Pavagadh hermitage where Visvamitra supposedly lived is mentioned 3 times in a Sanskrit play which was composed in the 15th century, which documents the triumph of a Rajput ruler over a Muslim sultan. But unfortunately, in 1484, the last Rajput ruler was defeated by a sultan. The Chauhans also claim to be descendants of Prithviraj Chauhan, who was obviously important in Indian history. So you see the connection between Prithviraj Chauhan and the rulers of places like Chota Udaipur and Baria state. The Gohils of Bhavnagar were the heads of that clan, which included other states like Rajpipla and Palatana. In the 8th century, their ancestors were defeated and had to move. At one point, they had a kingdom in Marwar, but they returned to Saurashtra in the 13th century. And in the 18th century, the modern state of Bhavnagar really came into play. The 2 major clans of rulers in British times were the Jadijas, and they ruled many states that we've talked about, particularly Kutch, Limdi, Morbi, the Jam Sahibs, and so on and so forth. What's important to realize that each of these states faced tremendous problems within the state from the brotherhood, the other members of the clan, who could claim that they might want to be the ruler. And there were very often battles about this. The Jhala clans are the clans that we're going to hear today. We're going to hear about a man who leaves Sindh and comes to Gujarat. And we're going to hear about his relationship with the goddess of Shakti Ma and the formation of the Jhala clan. Today, that man, Maharaja Jayasinhji, Jayabapa, is emeritus professor of anthropology, visual anthropology at Temple University. So he's going to be able to tell us about the goddess Shakti Ma and how she saved children from an elephant. Again, one of the things we want to stress is the Jhalas did not only rule in Gujarat, they ruled in other places. And they were kingdoms established in places like central India, as well, and Rajasthan, as well as in Gujarat. Let's move on. We could talk all day about the Rajas, but we need to move on to this great presentation by the Maharaja of Dhrangadhra, my friend Jayapapa Jhala.
Thank you, Ken, and greetings, everyone. Good evening to everyone in Mumbai. Greetings in the morning to our friends in the US. My name is Jayasinhji Jhala. I am today the 47th Jhaleshwar, Maharaja Sri Raj of Halwa Dhrangadhra. I am very privileged, and I thank Dr. Nalawala and the Asiatic Society for inviting me to address you today. As a visual anthropologist and ethnographer, I have worked in several countries, as well as spent good amount of my time in India and with the peoples of Arunachal, Apatani, and Wangchu in what is now Arunachal, but was once Nifa. But today's lecture is about this particular region of Jhalawar, or which in the modern interpretation is the district of Surendranagar, right in the middle of today's Gujarat. Ken has already spoken about the plurality of Rajput states, and because this particular lineage came, as he pointed out, from Kirantigad in Sindh. Over 900 years, many things have happened to it, and also to the progeny of the founder, so that there are many states in the regions of Saurashtra, Mewar states, in Madhya Pradesh at Narwar. Rajasthan is the, and then the last and youngest state, or state, is in UP, in Labwa. So I would seek your indulgence to answer questions, because we have a long film which I hope will tell you the story, and that's what I would like to do. The Jhalas of this particular lineage saw the coming and goings of the Solankis. They were brought in. They were the family related to the Solankis. That's how they came to Sindh, from Sindh. Then the Muslim sultanates, Delhi and Gujarat, the Mughals, the Marathas, the British, and now they are continuing to exist as a community and a people. There is no Indian states, but the custodians of this region are very much there, and I am a spokesperson for this. There's been a diaspora, and people from this area have gone all over the world, and so because of the new modern examples and opportunities, there are now connections well outside the region. People who are Jhalavaris are not all Jhalas. Everybody who lives on the face of Jhalavar and who is the worshipper of Shaktima. Shaktima is Jhalavarima, the Mother Earth. And everybody who eats the grain of whatever way they survive, they're all the progeny of that particular divine presence. So with that note, can I request the organizers to please show the film Speaking Stones, Singing Stones. I think the film is very simple and straightforward, and we can take some questions if there are any at the end of it.
Roughly 100 kilometers west of the metropolitan city of Ahmedabad lays the Saurashtra Peninsula, home to the former kingdoms of the Jhala clan of Rajputs. Being of the Rajput, or warrior caste of Hindus, the Jhala clan ruled this region for close to a millennium, sculpting a grand legacy of song, imagery, and history in architecture. In the summer of 2005, I was privileged to journey to the kingdom of Jhalabad and was guided through architectural accomplishments many would never know or see. Palaces and temples, fortresses and stepwells, born of stone and story, spoken through echoes and ripe with meaning.
This is the story of speaking stones and singing stones.
Our home for the summer, Dhrangadhra, was the final capital of Jhalavad before the dissolving of official Indian monarchies in 1947. Dhrangadhra translates from Gujarati as the land of stone. As practiced for thousands of years, laborers quarry the stone using chisels, hammers, and pickaxes, providing the very material for architectural expression and the vessels for remembrance.
The story of Jalavar begins with the legendary Harpal Dev. Harpal was the prince of the kingdom of Kerantigad, located in the Sindh region of modern Pakistan. When his father's fortress was sacked in the late 11th century, Harpal fled Sindh, crossing the treacherous run of Kutch for the kingdom of his maternal grandmother in Gujarat. His grandmother, Queen Udaymati, Rani Udaymati of the Solanki dynasty, was the widow of Bhim Devji, paramount king of Gujarat.
Nearly a millennium later, we retrace the steps of Harpal across the Rann. Every summer, during the monsoon season, the waters of the Arabian Sea overcome enormous areas of this desert, as if erasing it of memory. Like footprints, Harpal's legacy will mark the new countryside, each place awaiting its particular fate.
We meditate in the Rann upon his great journey 925 years ago.
ઉદયમતીમાં રાણીએ વાય બંધાવી છે અને વાય કેવી બંધાવી છે એવા વાસ હું વાયના વખાણ કરું.
Rani Nivav translates from Gujarati as the Queen's Stepwell. Common to arid Indian landscapes, the stepwell embodies the combination of two functional forms of architecture. Typically, a stepwell conjoins a utilitarian water well with religious shrines that step downward from the surface to an underground spring. These temples vary in size and depth and allow for the fluctuation of water levels depending on respective amounts of rainfall. As the largest of such structures, the Rani Nivav extends 7 stories beneath the surface. Each story is a pillared pavilion, allowing for visitors to collect water or simply relax in the cool depths. Built at the city of Patana by Queen Udaymati in the year 1063, this monumental and magnificent stepwell is arguably the most beautiful of its kind in the world. Dedicated to the Hindu lord Vishnu, the walls of the Vav elaborately depict his many avatars or celestial forms. Here is the avatar of the boar Varaha, rescuing the earth from the depths of the ocean. The earth Prithvi sits comfortably upon his elbow, in confidence. Here, in beautiful artistry, is a panel depicting the Lord Kalki, trampling his enemies in a prophesized battle yet to come. The detail retained in these three-dimensional forms is remarkable, though some panels have suffered more deterioration than others. Adjacent is a panel to the goddess Durga, destroying Mahishasur, the buffalo demon, symbol of ignorance. Nearby stands a panel depicting Vamana the dwarf as an avatar of Vishnu. The panel depicting the great queen Udaymati is one of many that were removed from the structure. The present Jhala king, at a separate location, keeps a reproduction of the queen's panel. For over 900 years, the entirety of this magnificent structure was buried in sand and silt by the sudden and massive overflowing of the Saraswati River. Covered for so many years, elements of the upper levels of the stepwell were removed and used to construct a substantially smaller stepwell closer to the center of the city. Only since the beginning of its excavation in 1986 was it restored to its full grandeur and revealed to the eyes of the world. Its excavation was daunting at the least, as the Rani Nivav is approximately 65 meters in length, 20 meters wide, and almost 30 meters deep. As it stands today, it is complemented by roughly 500 stone sculptures.
Here, Rani Udaymati is shown as a patron of a magnificent stepwell. With her attendants, she exhibits both the spiritual and practical uses of the sacred space. Contemplating the Lord Vishnu in his many forms, she takes refuge from the brutal heat of the summer season. In Patan, as the legend goes, the great Harpal Devji, the maternal grandson of Rani Udaymati, won glory by defeating the menacing demon Babru Bhut. In Patan, he also won the hand of the goddess Shaktima. On this fateful night, with Babru Bhut the demon and Shaktima the goddess, he flies over the land, marking the sacred geography of Jalavar. The women of the royal Jhala court sing Di Ghadiye Ugairo, a hymn celebrating the creation of the Jhala kingdom.
From Patan, we moved on to the roadside town of Patadi. Here stand the remnants of a grand citadel, only a few walls, bastions, and crumbled towers. Though not much remains today of the citadel at Patadi, the history of this location reveals its great significance, both to the Jhala clan and to worshippers of the principal Hindu deity of this region.
After liberating Patan from the demon Babru Bhut and marrying the Solanki princess Shakti, Harpal Dev establishes the capital of Jhalavar at Patadi at the end of the 11th century. Built upon rising ground, the citadel would remain the capital of the Jhala Deep or Jhala king for the next 240 years. It is here that Harpal's divine wife Shaktima gave birth to her 3 sons, the founders of future Jhala dynasties. One day, according to legend, the sons of Shaktima and Harpal came upon sudden danger. While playing together in the courtyard at Patadi, the 3 boys stood unknowingly in the path of a stampeding elephant. At the very last moment, their mother, Shaktima, acted, extending her mighty arm from the balcony above, scooping up her sons, saving them from certain death. This act of Jhalvu, elevating the boys to safety, conferred the name Jhala, the uplifted ones, onto the 3 sons. This act revealed Shaktima's divine powers as a living goddess to the populace. At the present day, she is worshipped as a principal goddess in the region of Jhalavar.
Here at the village of Baisabgad, I watched the reenactment of this story, played by a troupe of traveling Babai performers.
The legacy of her deification conferred divine descent upon her royal sons and onto their Jhala descendants. In Patadi, the descendants of Shaktima and Harpal Dev consolidate their rule and plant the foundation of the Jhala kingdom, which would endure from the 11th century onto the 21st century.
In an adjacent section of the Great Desert Ran sits a man-made oasis, a vital point of refuge. The desert tank is another example where water is of central importance to a structure. Like the Stepwell, this tank is filled by a tapped underground spring, combined with a collection of naturally falling rain. Together with the adjacent shrine to the god Shiva, both structures stand as a giver of life. Built by Jaladip Jayasinhji in an act of public service for the peoples of the desert in 1430, the king's tank remains a site of pilgrimage. To this very day, many keepers of livestock guide their flocks to Jaleshwar Kund. During our visit to Jinjawata, we were greeted and escorted in procession by many local Jhala residents and historians. Descendants of the Jhala clan proudly presented various points of historic importance, reinforcing the legacy of Harpal and their mother goddess Shaktima. It is difficult to imagine in the present day that Jinjawata was once a fortified port city with massive stone walls some meters in height. Now, so many kilometers inland, Maintaining, holding, and recapturing this location had once been imperative in protecting the maritime trade and stature of the Jhala kingdom. The elaborate and ornate gates of Jinjawata, built in the 12th and 13th centuries, are the finest example of martial Rajput architecture, which once gave primary passage into the medieval town. Built at a time before Hindu kings assimilated the true Muslim arch, the trabeated post and lintel gates celebrate a confident Hindu world. Though etched by the markings of a modernizing nation, many original elements of the town maintain their usefulness today. Still buzzing with life, the lake at Jinjawata is an expansive body of water contained by a masonry wall. Shrines to Hindu divinities that once graced its shores are now in ruins, but there are hints, as in the discrete panel of the constellations and astrological signs, of auspiciousness and well-being here at the water's edge. Though this town would never become capital of Jhalavad, its strategic value cannot be ignored, as aggressors to the kingdom would begin to appear more frequently and in greater numbers.
In the early 15th century, the capital of the Jhaleshwar moved from Patadi to Kankavati. At Kankavati, the great king Ram Mandalik of the Sorat kingdom in the southwest of Saurashtra comes to wed Umade, the daughter of Jhaleshwar Bhimsinghji, in 1456. The matrimonial alliance of the Jhala kingdom to the mighty kingdom of Surat was a cause of great celebration. Yet the exuberance of these events fails to warn of difficult times to come. New aggressors were appearing more frequently, challenging local and central kingdoms alike. Jhalawar was soon to be affected by the might of Muslim power.
The middle of the 15th century finds the capital of the Jaladeep at Kankavati. Though very little is left of the vast architecture that once stood here, one telling example still remains. A passageway that conjoins the Muslim-style arch and the trabeated Hindu gateway stands adjacent to the present village. The connection of these two structures in such a way symbolizes the great mix of Hindu-Muslim culture and religion that exists in Jhalavad to this day. It is the only example in which the Muslim arch and the Hindu gateway live side by side in Jhalavad.
I now walk to the exact spot of the greatest tragedy that befell Jhalawadi history. On April 19, 1486, 12 queens voluntarily leaped into the depths of this well to escape eternal dishonor. The Tiger King, their husband, Rajvagoji, and 8 of his sons died on the battlefield fighting Muhammad Begra, Sultan of Gujarat, here at Kankavati. In this representation, Rajvagoji, the gods, spirits of the deep, all salute the great sacrifice of these valiant queens.
All that remains today is the Muslim arch, the Hindu gateway, and the well of sorrow.
ઈડલ બાપુ વીર રસ કરીએ કે જેથી રજપૂતાઈ રે નો વાંધો ન આવે વીરરસની વાર્તાઓ કહીએ એટલે બાપુ અટાણે તો જમાનો જુઓ છે બાપુ, શું કરવું. પણ વીરરસની વાર્તાઓ કહીએ એટલે એનો કાંઈક ધડો રે વિખાય નહીં બાપુ. નહીતર અટાણે તો જુઓ છો શું માણસ કાયર થઈ ગયું છે બાપુ. આ સાધન થતાં માણસના અંગમાં કોઈ પણ વીરતા રહી જ નથી. પણ છતાંય કોઈક વીરનસ કરનાર હારો હોય તો એને મોડું ન પડવા દે બાપુ. એટલી વાત છે, બાકી તો શું વીરરસ બાપુ.
On February 2nd, 1487, the surviving prince, Rajodharji, the 24th ruler, established the Jhala capital at Halwa, where it would remain for the next 294 years. According to Bardic law, while riding a path on horseback, a small hare appeared directly ahead. As Rajodharji moved closer, the hare would not give way, forcing him to stop. Puzzled for a moment, he exclaimed that it would make a very special place to give life to such a brave hare. He struck his lance into the path, thus marking the well of Halwa. In 1987, this event, the 500th anniversary of the birth of Halwa, was celebrated.
Within the walls of the palace, Jhala princes and other dignitaries escort King Meghraji III as he recognizes all lineages of the Jhala clan, local and distant. The 500th anniversary brought to life the dynamic events that echo from the historic Halwa Palace. Built on the shores of Samastar Lake, Halwa Palace was designed to both fortify and ventilate, to provide security and comfort. Both massive and delicate, stone balconies on the southern and western walls channel the cool winds of the lake into private chambers and the gardens and courtyard within. The Ranivas, or quarters of the royal women, is placed within a great wall, ornamented by ornate, yet concealing, screened stoned balconies. It is separated from the king's quarters and public spaces by the primary courtyard, which gives passage to the central structure of the palace complex. Within the Ranivas walls, passageways lead to a smaller courtyard.
It is here that Ranoji, the 26th ruler, celebrates the 9-day Hindu festival of Navratri with his many wives, dancing the circular Garba. The women sing the hymn of the warrior, Hakpadi, reminding all of the duties of the warrior Rajputs.
The king's quarters are located within the primary central structure of the palace. A large 3-story rectangle, it is supported by beautifully carved wooden beams, struts, and highly ornate vertices. There are more than 1,000 wood-carved elephants, peacocks, and flowered vines that grace the balconies, pillars, screens, and doors. It is the only palace in India that boasts so many wood-carved elements, its materials imported from Burma. Within lies a grand courtyard, with raised walkways that divide 4 separate perfume gardens. From the 4 outer walls of the rectangle, the walkways lead to the magnificent 6-story octagonal tower, the precipice of Halwa, once the tallest structure in the region. The tower is a masterpiece of stone construction, boasting 32 delicately carved cantilever balconies.
Dara Shikoh, the eldest son of the famed Mughal emperor Shah Jahan, gives a jewel to Raj Meghrajji in the garden courtyard in 1659. His father was the builder of the great Taj Mahal. His grandfather was Emperor Jahangir, builder of the mosque in Lahore. His great-grandfather, Emperor Akbar, was the builder of the imperial city of Fatehpur Sikri.
The top floor of the primary structure is made of 4 large conjoined terraces, which circumscribe the entire garden courtyard. The terrible earthquake of 2001 has demolished large sections of the Halwa Palace complex, including some portions of the platform. Beautifully carved stone benches still line the remaining sections of the terrace, which give rise to a view of the town and the countryside beyond it.
In the land beyond Samasta Lake, Jayasinhji regularly enjoyed polo with friends and members of his court. It is said that in an act of heinous betrayal, his niece arranged for assassins to strike Jayasinhji when least expected on the polo fields outside the palace walls. On November 24, 1717, King Jayasinhji the Great was murdered.
From the central tower is a view of the palace complex in its entirety. We see the terrace from above and the adjacent Ranivas. Within the main courtyard stands the significant Halwa Pavilion, an historic meeting place for many Jhala rulers. The pillar and lintel pavilion would provide shade and shelter for noted visitors. The roof of the pavilion would double as a terrace during courtyard processions, performances, and demonstrations.
At the historic pillared pavilion, a new enemy was revealed to the Jhallavars by the 36th ruler, Jayasinhji II. It is here that he warned off the treacherous Marathas, hostile and fierce Hindu aggressors from the south. In his famous speech in 1737, he united the nobles of Jalavar and organized them for battle. His efforts were rewarded as the kingdom held the Marathas at bay, repelling their attacks.
On the outskirts of the town, the cenotaphs at Halwa pay respect to kings, nobles, and warriors who gave their lives to defend the kingdom. They also recognize loyal Jhalavaris of all castes. To this day, residents of Halwa observe and maintain these memorial stones with deep devotion. I watched as a devotee worshipped a hero stone of horse and rider, which he had just adorned with a sacred red pigment. As a whole, the cenotaphs, along with the palace complex, stand a symbol of the Jhala Rajput heritage. Yet this would not be complete without the attached temple to the goddess Shaktima. Within the official palace walls, overlooking Samasta Lake, the temple continues today as a site of pilgrimage for Hindu worshippers of the goddess to proclaim their devotion.
Here at Halwa, I worship Shaktima, our mother goddess, and other deities as the sun sets over Samasta Lake. After 294 years, the capital of the Jhaleshwar shifted to Dhrangadhra in 1780 in response to an internal threat. Sheshmalji, a younger brother of the king, Jakshanima, had seized this fortified city. To drive him out and regain this vital eastern town, Queen Jijima, with her young son Jayasinhji, came to Dhrangadhra with a force of cavalry, artillery, and riflemen. Recognizing the certainty of defeat, Sheshmalji sues for peace. From 1781 to the end of dynastic rule in 1947, Dhrangadhra remains the capital of the Jhaleshwara.
The fortification of Dhrangadhra combines sections of crenellated walls and bastions, with inner and outer gates designed to repel musketry, battering rams, and charging elephants. The gates were built in the late 18th century in a style reminiscent to classic Hindu architecture, combined with the Islamic archway of the main portal. Hindu accents appear in the embedded statues of guardsmen, while geometric and floral Islamic patterns appear in the closer carved details of the gates. Commuters pass through them today, as would the merchants and peddlers of the past. Across the city stands a temple built by Jayasinhji, dedicated to the goddess Shaktima. Ornamented by hermits, saints, celestial musicians, and mythical creatures, the temple is built in the traditional Hindu style. It attracts many daily worshippers and is the centerpiece of various celebrations throughout the Hindu calendar. With sword and shield in hand, Shaktima appears here as a warrior, riding confidently upon her dominant lion.
The last coronation of the Jhaleshwara was that of my father Rajmeghraji III. It is evoked by these photographs and the call of historic war drums. The present Raj Mahal of Dhrangadhra was built in 1896 by Jayasinhji, my great-grandfather. He was 24 years old at this time. He was succeeded in 1910 by Ghanshyam-Singhji, who in turn was succeeded by his son Rajmeghraji III in 1942. In 1948, Rajmeghraji voluntarily acceded to the Democratic Republic of India, thus merging the end of 900 years of dynastic Jhala rule with the independence of India from colonial rule, thereby conferring self-rule to the people of Jhalawar.
Ajit Navas Palace can be seen as a culmination of all things past and present in Jhalavad. It is of a unique style, combining elements of Western colonial architecture, retaining the arches and domes of Muslim architecture, and the ornamentation in large frescoes of Hindu themes. From a distance, the palace gives a Western Italianate impression, reinforced by red terracotta roof tiles and cupola top towers. Larger elevated chambers on both the eastern and western faces of the palace don a domed roof, embodying Indo-Saracenic features. Comprised of 3 rectangular structures, the king's residence is connected by a long corridor to the Hall of the Sun, the Durbar Hall, which is conjoined to the Zenane Mahal.
In this footage from a film made in 1980, we have a rare window into the life of royal women of my family. At that time, the Zanana within Ajit Navas was an exclusive and guarded wing of the palace. Here within the Zanana, my mother, Maharani Brijraj Kaurba, performs her daily puja, worshipping the pantheons of our gods, ancestors, and saints. Within the courtyard of the Zanana, women of my family and our servants join together to dance and sing the praises of our gods and ancestors. गादी मलराणी पाठ पाटो धरराणी गड हळवदना महाराणी साब गणी खम्मा गड जोदाराना कुंवर पुतर मोर लखियों पियर मोर राज रीति राखड़ हार दातार गणी खम्मा
The themes depicted in the 11th century at the Stepwell of Queen Udaymati in Patana are revisited here by Raj Jayasinhji 41 generations later. The Hindu mythological themes are depicted in an entirely new Western style, directly reminiscent of neo-realistic painting of the late 19th century, with hints of the Western principles of perspective and Victorian norms of modesty in dress. Here is a devotee of Shiva, defying the noose of death. Here again is the avatar yet to come, Kalki, upon his horse, still anticipating the trampling of his foes. Local castes are represented in the headdress of figures in the arch keystones, while Western gargoyles and cherubs have discrete place. The most fascinating wall is the north face of the Suraj Sabha, or the Hall of the Sun, where there are 4 panels that convey imperialism, nationalism, and religious and secular values of the West. Here is the Empress Queen Victoria, depicted as the goddess Britannia. With an orb and scepter in hand, she rides the Bull of Britain. Surrounded by the railway engineer, the geographer, the lawyer, and royal admiral, The panel illustrates the pillars of British imperialism. The adjacent panel depicts the goddess of India, Hind Devi, symbol of the rising new Indian nationalism. With a sword in one hand and a flag of unity in the other, she rides a lion, like the Jhala goddess Shaktima. Before the lion is the Punjabi of the north, the faithful Rajput at her feet, the learned Bengali beside him, and the southerner at his back. The panel represents the unification of the regional diversity of the Indian subcontinent. Two entirely new deities don the wings of an angel, an icon of Western religion. Shanti Devi, goddess of peace, stands between the biblical lion and the lamb. The goddess of justice, Nyaya Devi, stands winged and blindfolded, with the scale of impartial Western justice in one hand and the magisterial staff of law in the other. The palace structure combines both the administrative center and residence of the last kings of the Jhala dynasty, and symbolizes dominant ideologies of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The king as protector, the king as lawgiver, and the king as father. The final stop on our journey to this assemblage of architectural monuments is also the most recent expression of the Jhala clan. This impressive new temple is located at the town of Dhamma, some kilometers from the first 11th century Jhala capital at Patana.
Unlike earlier structures built by Jhala rulers and their consorts, the temple at Dhamma was built under the direction of King Meghraji III, with contributions from individual members of the dispersed Jhala clan from all over Jhalavar, from other parts of India, and in fact from overseas as well. It was an expression unifying the clan after the lapse of Jhala monarchy. Completed in 1997, this act of clan solidarity was totally destroyed by the earthquake of 2001. It was entirely rebuilt and consecrated in 2005.
Like the traditional temple in Dhrangadhra, the temple at Dhamma is larger in scale, donning classical ornamentation. The new temple was actually built around an ancient and rudimentary icon of the goddess. It resembles a memorial stone, with a lightly etched woman's face, embellished now with gold leaf and enameled eyes. The goddess faces east, and great care was taken to make certain that the new temple erected around it would not obstruct the rays of the morning sun from falling directly upon the icon. Her eternally devoted servant, the lion in white marble, gazes intently upon his mistress. Celestial musicians adorn the inner frame of the temple dome, leading to corners and highly ornate pillars.
It is said in song and story that at the sacred site of Dhamma, goddess Shaktima asked the ground to open. She walked down into the earth and merged with the ground, root and stone, all around, thus becoming the very land of Jhalavar.
" 79 years from the present day will arrive a grand milestone, the marking of 1,000 years since the arrival of the great Harpal Devji, the darshan of the goddess Shaktima, and the establishment of the sacred land of Jalavar. Over a millennia, the legacy of these people has been expressed through the song of the court and the story of the bard, in the painting and sculpture of Jalavari artists, by the practices of worship and spiritualism, and through the pages of history and genealogy. Encapsulated and rendered in architecture, these structures stand as monuments to the fortitude of Jhalavaris, and echo the relationship forged by laborer and visionary over 10 centuries. While the official kingdoms have lapsed, Jhalabad stands as do Jhalavaris. They defy the forces of dissolution and fight to preserve their identity, as they have done for the past 921 years. The spirit of the warrior, the protective watch of the goddess and her sons, and the tradition of family and ancestry are all pronounced and brought forth as the forces of globalization, technology, and outside influences stand afoot. Yet these are not uncommon visitors, akin to the Mughal emperors and British officials of times past. This is the story of speaking stones and singing stones.
I'm happy to take any questions that we would have. The story that we have told thus far is the story of one particular royal family. Before, there are many, as Kenneth said, many Jhala states. The story of Jalavar and the story of the Jhalas is far more comprehensive and would require a different film, a more expansive film where the landscape and the canvas would be all over northern India. And that is something can be attempted, but I think for the moment, this is an example, I think, of how larger and smaller states operated. What I want to emphasize here is that this may be a large Jhala state, but these activities, the worship of the goddess, the holding of land traditions, happen even in the smallest villages. And that is what keeps the culture vibrant. And why we do not think, at least Jhalavaris do not think, that with the lapse of kingdoms, that the lapse of ourselves as actors upon this land, blessed land, is something that we don't aspire to. So I think that's an important, but perhaps there would be some other questions that this invokes.
Yes, so, there are questions that are written in the chat box. So there is one question by Miss Sonam Soni. So she asks, hello sir, my question is, since the Jhalas were born of Shaktima, is there a tradition amongst the Jhala Rajputs to empower women?
Yes, I think one of the, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? There is, there's an entirely, unfortunately, I couldn't include them. We just have an example of one Jhala queen, who is Jijima. She precedes the Rani of Jhansi by almost 100 years in playing an active role in the management of the kingdom and, in fact, the rescue of the kingdom. In fact, this the example of Jhala ladies or Jhala queens extends back to the time, at least till the 14th century. Very prominent Jhala women are, of course, the first lady, Shaktima herself, is a Solanki woman and the maker of, co-maker of Jalavar itself with her husband. There is, it's miraculous, at least to know, that in the 14th century, when this disaster took place, the Jhala king's daughter, she is in fact deified as a person in Gujarat, just outside the capital of Gujarat now, Gandhinagar, where, because she died in battle as a teenager, battling for the defense of the Bharwad cattle who were being driven to slaughter. She had been visiting her mother's home, and she died, and she has subsequently become a goddess when a shrine to her was built by, I think, a Parsi family in the 19th century, and she's known as Jakshanima. So here we have one lady who's deified, who comes into the Jhala family, Shaktima, Solanki princess, or Solanki royal person. She wasn't a princess, she was the daughter of a cadet. And then this Jhala Jakshanima, who was a Jhala daughter. Beyond that, there are several examples. I think this was referred to in the conversation we had at the last session, where many regencies are held because of the fact that rulers died in their minorities, sometimes even posthumously. The custodianship was often in the Patrani on the Rajmata. And the Rajmata, as a tradition, sometimes the Rajmatas gain more power in their widowhood than they did while they were in fact the Ranis. And this is very important to know, but I can't explain that in this particular film. The film was a way to show the region and the people, and not concentrate just on the people. Don't live, the royal family is integrated. No palace, in my opinion and experience, was ever a private palace until it became a hotel. Even today, palaces in Dhrangadhra, Halwa, there are shrines in it. In Dhrangadhra, there are shrines in it, not just the shrines of the person, of clans of the clan. Sometimes there are deities brought in by the ladies. Jadejas, for instance, came more recently into Jhala life. They only appear around the 1500s. Before that, there were no Jadejas. After that, 52 queens were Jadeja queens in 47 generations. No, not in 20 generations. So the question of the Jadeja as well as the Jhala exchange is only one. And when you have many particular clans whom you marry into, I am related to many people all over India by virtue of the fact that my ancestors, and for last 5 generations, my grandfather had 5 ladies, 5 Maharanis, and therefore they were from different clans, from Udaipur, Sishodhya. They were from the Jadeja ladies as well as Vaghelas. So, in other words, the attention also, there was in the 1400s a confederacy, an alliance between 3 Rajput. With the fall of the Solankis, what remained then were the Chauhans, the Chudasamas, and the Jhalas in the peninsula. They, against the Sultan of Gujarat, there was a fortification and they battled to retain the areas. Chudasama doesn't exist now. Porbandar was the last Chudasama who preceded the Jhalas. In the time of the Solankis, they were in fact the dominant power in the peninsula. the Solankis were dominant in North Gujarat, and so these are important. That the entire Surat thereafter became the province of imperial rule by virtue of the Muslims, and then of course the Sultanates, and then of course the Mughal.
Okay, so I'll take on to the next question.
Please do.
Just one thing about the previous question. So I think we need to distinguish between different states, because there are certain states like Bhavnagar that are known for female education. And what we see over and over again is the particular interest of the local ruler. You know, we talk about does the ruler have any power? We've talked about how Sayaji Rao had tremendous power culturally to change things. In Bhavnagar, you have the same sort of thing. And we need to think about the difference between the liberation or the powers of royal women and the average woman in the street or in the field. Those are two different issues.
Right. Okay, so we move on to the next question. So the question is that the form of performance or drama that we saw in the film was Bhavai, and it was believed that only men performed Bhavai. Women were not allowed to see them perform. Why was that? Please share your views on this.
The performers are all men, and the women of the Kodi, of the Bhavai, they were forbidden to watch their men perform. But it is not true at all, at least not in my experience of the last 50 years, that performance in the village did not have women present. So the women were present at all recordings or events that I visited. These are the Trakada Bhavai, and there are of course many troops of Bhavai performers with separate lineages. The Trakada Bhavai are resident in Kankavati, and they had a requirement until my great-grandfather's time, Jayasinhji's time, when they had a mandatory performance they had to give to the royal court. So the question is that women could not see them. The only prescription that I know, the women of the wives of the Bhavayas, they are prohibited from seeing them for a reason I don't know necessarily, but perhaps it is they don't want to see their men performing in ways that they could not ordinarily do in their normal lives.
Okay. So there is a next question. This is, did the Dhrangadhra state or Jhallavars have anything unique to their cuisine? I'm interested in the history of food.
Well, for me, the most valuable food that I value is the rotla, the bajra. That is the most valuable food. Of course, there are many types of foods that are created. Another one in the royal household in my childhood had many kitchens. There was Goanese European cooks, as well as Jain cooks, Brahmin cooks, and then of course there were the cooks who cooked, Muslim cooks who cooked meat. And in terms of dishes, what I very much liked, or the royal kitchen was fond of, was venison and boar. Particular preparations. There was a lot of influence in the Jhala Dhrangadhra household in my lifetime, which came from Marwar, because my mother was from there. One of the delicacies for me, I'm a very simple foodie, so to speak, was jalebis made of gold. I hate the jalebis made from sugar. These are Gorni jalebi. And there are thaplas and there are various other things. We also have a very important grain, very little known. It's called theg. Theg is a seed, transparent seed that grows on the very coast edges of the run. It needs a certain kind of soil, and it looks like it is soft, and the color of rice, but it's not rice. Theg is called theg. These are special particular dishes of my choosing, but of course there are condoys and other people who speak far more eloquently than I would about the cuisine of Jhalavar.
I think it's very interesting, and I think linked to this topic is another question, which is there anything specific to the prasad in like puja thali? So there's a special prasad, so which would have been made for Shakti Ma. So was there anything specific that you recall?
There is over different times and different occasions, Shakti Ma is treated differently depending on the date and occasion, and not only her but all the other goddesses. You see, the Jhala royal household is also comprised not just of Shakti Ma, she is the principal deity, but Nagrechi Ma is the grand deity of the Rathors. When Our Lady came from the court of the Mughal Emperor, Jahangir was a brother-in-law of the Jhala house, because his wife, who became the Begum of, was from Jodhpur. Her elder sister was married to Chandrasinhji, the ruler of, because Akbar and Raisingji, the father of Chandrasinhji, were friends, had become friends. And so when he married, he sent his son to marry the Gajsinghji's sister. The other lady, Satyabhama ji, came to Dhrangadhra. Now when she came, she also brought her entourage, her forces, and this was the time, since the time she came in late 1500s, there's a shrine in Halwa Palace to Nagrechi Ma. There's also shrines to Babrasur. There's a shrine to Marmara Devi. Marmara Devi is the Kul Devi of the Jhalas. Shakti Ma is the Mata of the Jhalas. She is not the Kul Devi. Kul Devi comes at a much earlier time. Kul Devi precedes Krishna. There's a shrine in Dwarka where my ancestor in the 12th century established in the Sikhar of Dwarka, where there's a shrine to Shakti Ma. And that is a point of pilgrimage that we go. But Marmara Devi was the primary deity before Marmara emerges from the ocean, as we all know, when the gods themselves are unable to deal with the demons. So she is the clan deity across. But there are other deities as well. There's Khodiarma. Other many important queens brought their goddesses with them, and some of them, for act of certain, most of the queens who are deified operate after their death. After their death, they are seen to be doing certain kinds of benedictions and dealing with health and other issues, maybe some diseases that may be prevalent at that particular time. It is those who are then remembered as acting in their posthumous life that are then deified and their shrines built to them. So it's a complex. It's not just the living women, it's the women who in fact influence. So kar is a thing that is found in all castes in Saurashtra, and I think in Gujarat, where you must go when you marry and enter another family. The person who's leaving the family goes to pay the ancestral shrine, as well as the incoming bride must pay obeisance to their particular goddesses. And so these are very important in what Ken said, in the molding and making for this intense network of communication and exchange, food-wise, dress-wise. For instance, I regret that in this film we couldn't include textiles. One of the most important textile of the 19th century is a tent which is just been published in a book by Shilpa Shah. She is a collector of textiles in Mumbai, family of textile collectors, which was built in this was created by Jayasinhji in the 19th century. It is supposedly the best example of its kind, but it's made by Kachi. It's chain stitch as well as mochi bharat. So I didn't talk. I didn't include that. I didn't include many other portions of architecture. We encounter on the Diu, fortress at Diu, the Jhala involvement there, as well as in Dwarka. We just didn't go. We didn't have the time to make what we did. But maybe if there's another question, there's also a very important question about animals. Animals, especially in Jhalavar, we have, and I think all over Gujarat, we have the practice of Jeev Daya. Jeev Daya is, and we made a film about that, which is animal compassion. And here again, just as the maintenance of traditions, the Jains, particularly in Jhalawar, are the champions of making sure that we maintain this particular attitude towards women. Jeev Daya is the pontification of Jeev Daya. The most important ritual is one that the poorest man, a woman, can practice, which is called Kadiyaru. Kadiyaru is simply taking some dough and sprinkling it on the ground where you see ants. And the idea is that the poorest man is feeding millions. There's no greater danvirta than the ability to give something before you have the first meal of the day. So in the town in Dhrangadhra, we have people who put a little grain out for wandering cows or wandering goats. That is a normal practice. And in the Dhrangadhra Palace as well, people who are in some form of service would do that.
Okay. So there is another question. This is there a Jhalavar school of painting and other arts?
Jhalavar school of painting is, the painting that you see is a 21st century interpretation. There was some painting in the 20th century, but by local painters, which were destroyed. I think my father didn't like very much interpretation of that. But the person, there were some few portraits that were done, paintings, both indigenous paintings I think we saw, as well as European painters of the Maharajas. But the paintings that you saw today are a creation by this man who's talking to you, as well as his students, as well as a leading painter of miniature painting. He's a teacher. He was a teacher at the Mayo Girls School in Ajmer. He's of a family of painters, and he had encounter with me, and then over 20 years he painted more than 150 paintings of stories based on the history as we conceive it. The history of this place is based on epigraphic evidence monuments, Jain documents, as well as British documents. But a large important part is the Wahi, as well as the Sangra. Sangras are village Wahis. And for instance, the account of this battle where Kankavati is destroyed, in the account by Muslim accounts, it's very different than the British account. But you then have the Kond account, which is the village. Then you see how was it that in 30 years he recovered this land. And the participation of Brahmins and other people who shelter him, as well as how the gods intervene, all of that is part of the story. Now, in terms of what is history, is of course is to be asked a question. And the question that I'm involved in is my work is to ask the question why. Why? Whose paintings is the painting? As the film I made on paintings of the miniature painting schools with a curator, collector in Philadelphia, whose Belak is very fine collection is now in the Philadelphia Museum of Rajput painting. So he's a friend of mine, and we talked about whose painting is it? You are the collector, but whose paintings are they? So this is a wonderful question that I think we must all pose. There's never one answer. It's very unfortunate if we latch on to one answer. The plurality of answers and opinions, they all have place.
Absolutely. I think we have already, it is way past our time. So I think there are few questions which are still there, but I don't know.
You can write to me and I can be happy to answer them. If you can share my email.
He's a very generous person, as you can see.
Absolutely.
At the time, you can answer the existing questions and or
I'm here to answer.
File to you and you can answer them and we'll share them with the participants.
Whichever way. I mean, if you're up to it, then I can go ahead with the questions that are posed.
No, my day is for you. My day just begun.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So I think I'll just pick up one or two.
Sure.
So
please.
yeah. So there's one question which again talks about was the birth of a girl child welcomed in the family?
I would say no.
No. Okay.
I'm now talking about this. Across. Nobody didn't want the child once she was there, but the preference would be for a male child. The preference is something, and I think this is definitely an important aspect to understand. Now it's not the same, but it was certainly the same. But parda, which we understand to be an imposition, parda came very late. In the 14th century, our girls are riding and riding into battle is not so often spoken about. But later on, it became more of a problem. But I would think that there's an unfortunate thing in these patriarchal, male-dominated descents, where the female has been in Rajputs as well as others, not as honored as they have been. Mothers are honored, wives are less honored, daughters are honored when you're in the giving of them, but their arrivals are not necessarily time to trumpet.
So related to the previous question, so this is Soni asking again, were the widows allowed to remarry?
No, not that I know. Not of Jhala ladies at any level.
Okay. Okay. So
there are many women in Jhalavar, and they must be all over. People of other castes, remarriage is not uncommon. Remarriage for certain castes was not uncommon. for the Khawas class, or for the Hedut class, or for Kodis. Remarriage was, you could only marry once, but Matha Bhattara, that means you touched your head, making a second wife. And also polygamy. There were many, it was not just that the Maharajas had, my family Baba had 3 wives. And the family Baba has 7 generations. When I was a young boy, I met the family Baba, and he had met Ralma-Singh Baba. 7 generations he had seen, and he had 3 wives. So the question, wives were also not only for procreation. Wives were also, at least amongst the Jhala Rajputs, were for support. Suppose somebody did not get a daughter, didn't find a husband. Often wives were taken to support these particular families. I mean, in recent times, of course, my father had just one lady, my mother, but my grandfather onwards, I don't think, there's only one person in between, maybe he died young, he had 1 wife. But we've had as many as 15 royal wives in the 18th century. The early between 4 and 7 wives were not uncommon. Often picking them as to where the clans came from. And certain clans fall in prestige. And then, like I said, the Jadejas didn't exist. And then the Jadejas become the dominant makers of kings of the Jhala dynasty of Dhrangadhra.
So I'll move on to another question. So Akshaya is asking, so we have been listening about the contributions of the princely states for the past few days. Did the state of Dhrangadhra take concrete measures to empower their women, educate them, and make laws to protect their rights?
Well, I can't speak with any great knowledge about this. So far as I know, there was my father instituted many. He was the Uparaj Pramukh of Saurashtra, and in the 7 years he was the ruler, there was legislature as well, but I don't know if there was any girls' schools. My mother formed a girls' school, but I don't believe there was Gatshala. There were, of course, but I don't believe that there was any. There were schools. Jayasinhji High School was created by grandfather, and there were schools, but I don't think there were particular schools designed for ladies or for girls.
I'm going to just take one last question.
Yes.
This is by Gitika Rathore. So she asks, Sir, did the ruler of Dhrangadhra participate in state or national politics after independence?
Yes, he was in Parliament. He was in Parliament. He was also the Intendant General of the Princes. I think in a talk a little earlier, we heard about Kamadia and how they challenged the British power in Britain in the House of Commons there. I think my father's challenging Indira Gandhi, defeating Indira Gandhi in Parliament as well as in the Supreme Court is probably the only example of Rajput or independent state challenging the might of the government of India when they were in the process of abolishing privileges that were held in high regard by Mahatma Gandhi as well as Sardar Patel. But that was not the impression of the Nehruvian families, and there are other factors. But so this is the role of my father as and there were other Jhala, Chuda, Thakur of Chuda was elected, several others were elected. Late Makaner, Jhala state, he was the first environment minister of the central government. There was no Ministry of Environment until Jayasinhji of Makaner, he just passed away recently, was a member of parliament and member in Mrs. Indira Gandhi's cabinet. So I think that besides my father, there's been no other person in the Dhrangadhra family who's been in politics, but several other Jhala states.
That's the subject of tomorrow's lectures. We have with us the world expert Bill Richter, who really documented almost every single Maharaja across India in the post-independence things. And we also have with us the former Consul General of the United States, who lived in Wankaneer House in Mumbai, which was then the American consulate, and showing how the palaces of the Maharajas were repurposed post-independence.
I think I would like to add this. Both my two persons, Bill Richter as well as John MacLeod, they are both students of my father in the sense that they got a lot of their insight in the time they spent with my father in their PhD years as well as later. And there are many other scholars who came to know my father. Doug Haynes is another. I'm not sure about Indian scholars who worked with him, but I think Dr. Joshi, several others are also involved. He was a scholar. He did his he studied at Oxford and in anthropology as well as other things.
And not only was he an anthropologist, but your daughter also is a historian as well of India.
Yes, my elder daughter is a historian.
Wonderful. I thank you very much, Professor Jhala, for your lecture today, for your film. I think all of us, I am specifically enamored by the film, by your personality. And for me, you are like a living legend. We often think of meeting someone who can connect us to the past. And I think many of our students who are present in the meeting today can easily benefit from what you have said and the kind of film that you've made. So thank you very much for
I want to say something to you, Maitri, because yesterday you said something important. And that was that there were some people who had given you, the business family had given you some documents that is now housed at the university. There's a lot of documents that I have that may find place in Baroda. My father was trained in Baroda when he was the Maharaja, but he was in minority. His training took place in Baroda. The Maharaja of Baroda is my uncle, not the present one, but Fateh Singh Rao was married to my mother's sister. And so I know Baroda as a young boy. I have not been there in many years. And the Maharani of Baroda is a Jhali. She's the daughter of Vakana. So we have a lot of connections with Baroda.
So hopefully I can lay my hands on the documents once you share them. And
and also there's Baroda, also Jhala, one of my ancestors, Jakshanima, was captured by Baroda and taken in a cart in the 1800s, and his wife Jijima, who rescued him, paid the ransom for 1,40,000 at that time to rescue him. So there's a lot of connection with Baroda, not always the happiest ones, but nonetheless.
Thank you very much. I thank everybody for joining today. And we'll see you tomorrow.
Please share my email with anyone. They want to communicate with me. I'm happy to do.
We'll do that. So thank you everybody for joining today, and good night to my Indian friends, and good day to my American and European colleagues and friends. So I'll see you all tomorrow at the same time. That is at 7 to 8:30. Have a nice day and good night to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.